The Nerdcast Empire is on the air. We are back with another week of podcasting excellence here on the Nerdcast Empire. I am Matt in the studio, joined in the studio once again this week by Mike. Mike, how's it going?
You mean Mike, future Booker of the Year?
We're going to see about that.
Yeah, I am ready to go. Let's do this.
It's going to be an interesting couple of episodes. This is a two-part episode, if you will, the Nerdcast Empire. And joining us for part one this week and presumably part two next week will be Chris from Parts Unknown. Chris, how's it going?
You mean future worst Booker of the Year, Chris from Parts Unknown.
No, I think I just said Booker of the Year, so that could be either, I suppose.
That's true. It's true.
Doesn't necessarily have to be the best.
I'll have to check in with Uncle Dave and see who gets to win those awards at the end. But yeah, the guys are talking about booking. So get this week's episode. And I should point out the next few Sunday episodes are going to be very wrestling heavy. So if you want to break from that, we encourage you to check out our Music Mondays on the Nerdcast Empire each and every Monday. That's been going really well. Probably in mid-April, we are going to be debuting a Thursday podcast, which will be dedicated mostly to anime, maybe occasionally to video games. But that'll be coming up after we get through the WrestleMania podcasting stuff, because there's just so much podcasting that's going to come from that. So we're going to get through that probably mid-April. We're shooting for our weekly Thursday edition. But for the next 2 weeks, we are a solutions-oriented podcast. We have seen the AEW ratings. We have seen the crowd size. The last couple of weeks have been better. AEW needs some help, and we're not here to kick them while they're down. We are here to help them out. So over the next 2 weeks, what we have decided to do, and we're going to have fun with this, so hopefully nobody takes this too seriously, but we have decided that we are going to rebook 5 titles in AEW with a champion, and then 6 people in the division that could be considered contenders for that championship. That is the goal for this week. So we have basically limited it to the 2 world titles, men's and women's, the 2 mid-card titles, the TNT title and the TBS title for men's and women's, and then the men's tag team titles. If we continue on with this, or we pick this back up at some point, we may go back and also book women's tag teams as well, possibly trios. I mean, there's so much you can do with this, but just for our sanity and to kind of limit the wrestling pool, we've limited it to those 5 divisions. And this week we're going to tell you who each of us has chosen for those divisions. And then next week we are going to book a fictional pay-per-view with some or all of those talents in a pay-per-view event, really just to kind of show that AEW does have a ton of talent. It's really not a talent issue with them. Maybe it's a booking issue, maybe it's whatever, but we're going to try to help them out by booking a really great event. Now, a couple of things to note right off the top. Number one, the exercise we're doing is a far easier exercise than booking weekly television, because we're not having to book different shows. We're not building long-term storylines. We're just dropping in an all-star event, basically just like All In was, like All Out, the first Double or Nothing, before they had started weekly TV. So by all accounts, this is a much easier exercise. The other thing about this is I'm giving the guys and myself basically a blank slate. So the wrestlers that will be chosen could be heel or face. If they're injured, we can bring them back, magically heal them. They are now in the picture. Storylines, you can use the existing storylines. You can ignore the existing storylines. Tag teams, you can break up tag teams. You can put tag teams together. Basically giving them carte blanche to book this however they want to book it. So it'll be very interesting to see how that all shakes out. But what we're going to do this week is we're going to tell you what our rosters look like. And we'll start with the men's tag team division. And we're going to start with Mike. Mike's in studio with me. He's going to go through his 6 tag teams, or 7 tag teams, I should say, the champion tag team, and then the 6 teams that are in the division. And then Chris and I can take a minute to kind of talk about his choices and go from there. So let's start with Mike.
Where do we want to start? With the bottom or the top?
You're the first one that gets to go, so you get to decide.
Okay, well, let's start from the top then for this round. For my tag team champions, I'm picking a team that I think can be widely considered one of the greatest tag teams in the modern era, if not the best. A team that is popular with that fan base, as well as people who maybe aren't necessarily AEW fans, and that'd be FTR, Dax Harwood and Cash Wheeler. Moving on from there, I am going to pick a couple of the EVPs, Matthew and Nicholas Jackson, the Young Bucks. While sometimes their work can kind of wear on me, they're part of the executives of the company. You got to have them around. They can put on good matches. From there, rounding out the rest of my list, I have Penta El Zero Miedo and Rey Fenix, Lucha Brothers, Kyle O'Reilly and Roderick Strong, Buddy Matthews and Brody King, Adam Copeland and Christian Cage, and then finally Lance Archer and Wardlow.
I think FTR as champion sure makes a ton of sense. Those guys, they very well could be the best tag team in the world, regardless of company. I don't know how well AEW has really showcased those guys, but they were great in WWE, even in a time where tag team wrestling wasn't really taken very seriously, and they've been very good in AEW as well. That's a great choice. And really, you look down the list, the Bucks obviously make a ton of sense. They're popular with the fan base. I know there are some people maybe that have soured on them a little bit in that AEW fan base, but those guys need to be there. Penta and Phoenix make a ton of sense. I think they've been totally underutilized.
Yeah,
I think
I would agree.
You think back to their matches in early AEW, but I would even go farther back and look at some of their matches in Impact and in AAA. Those guys are really talented, and I think they work better as a tag team than as individual performers.
Or as many kind of trio or anything of that nature, for that matter.
I'm not a huge fan of trios matches on the regular. Like the occasional 6-man tag, I'm good with that. I think it's just hard to do good trios matches, and there aren't a ton of teams that do them well. So I think you end up in kind of awkward booking. O'Reilly and Strong, obviously the Undisputed Era tie there. I think that makes a lot of sense. Buddy Matthews and Brody King, again, House of Black, an underutilized faction. Those guys are both really good. Definitely like that pairing. I like Copeland and Cage. Obviously, I'm going to spoil myself in my picks. I will have them as well. So that makes a ton of sense. I think they've had their feud. Now it's time to bring them together and do something together before one or both of them hang it up. And Lance Archer and Wardlow, two guys that should be on TV every week. Lance Archer is really, really good, and I think he's completely underrated. And Wardlow is another dude that sometimes it feels like they're going to do something with, and then he just kind of gets lost in the shuffle. He's way too good, has the perfect look, really should be on TV every week, but a really solid tag team division.
Yeah, kind of going back to the Archer and Wardlow. Wardlow, to me, is the one guy that AEW created. He's a homegrown star, essentially. Going back to their earliest events when they had like vignettes for him before the show. Obviously, they've built this dude enough where he needs to be there regularly. And Archer was kind of at a career high going into AEW, and to me has kind of fallen off ever since. I don't know what's keeping this guy from a more prominent position week in and week out.
Yeah, totally agree with that. Chris, your thoughts on Mike's tag team division?
Yeah, I think our tag team divisions across the board are going to look very similar. Adam Copeland and Cage are going to be very popular, not just on your guys' boards. I think it's kind of an inevitable thing that everybody wants to see. So it's more of when it's going to happen, not if. So you almost have to include that. Matt and Nick Jackson, once again, it's hard not to include them in a tag team dispute here. And same with FTR. So, I mean, across the board, we have a couple that are different, but I'd say we're very similar here.
Yeah, I think so. And speaking of which, since you've got the floor, why don't you go ahead and give me your tag team division?
Yeah, all right. Switching over to mine, and just as like a preface for my picks, I honestly, I don't think I've watched AEW since the last time we saw it live. So a lot of my knowledge of some of the teams that have formed over the years, I've kind of had to just look up, kind of monitor storylines and try to get away from my normal news, which is nothing but bickering journalists and Twitter personalities.
You're in good company. So that's kind of where we're at too, for the most part.
Yeah.
For the AEW men's tag titles, I went ahead and I put the Young Bucks as the champions here, going in as heels. I feel like, kind of like Mike said, while their showmanship can kind of wear on me during their matches, it's hard to deny how important they've been to the tag team division. And this heel persona that they've been kind of thrown into recently, I feel like if they really lean into that and really dig into the social media, almost hearkening back to being the Elite days, and just go full in heel, online, offline, everywhere they go. I mean, people already want them to lose. They're going to tune in to see if they lose. So you just really lean into it. Number one contender was kind of just an experimental pick on my part, and I picked Eddie Kingston and Claudio Castagnoli. They've had a history, almost a decade and a half of a feud. So I thought it would be interesting to kind of have these guys who have kind of buried the hatchet, we'll maybe see what they can do. Eddie Kingston isn't my favorite wrestler by any means. I'm not on the Eddie Kingston hype train, but people want to see him. And if you're going to come out here and try to essentially fix AEW, you can't not include him when so many people want to see Eddie Kingston. So I had to feature him, went ahead and threw him in the tag title scene just to see if we can shake things up a little bit. After them, I've got Adam Copeland and Christian. I've got the Guns. Roderick Strong and Wardlow were kind of a late addition on my part. Pentagon and Ray Phoenix. And then finally FTR, as I mentioned, also kind of stealing one of Mike's picks.
The Guns were a team that I didn't find a spot for in my tag team division, but I kind of feel bad about that because I think there's a lot of talent there. So of your picks, I think that's the one that if I could go back and steal going back the other direction, I think I would. But otherwise, Kingston and Castagnoli make a ton of sense. They do have a long history. They are both very popular with that crowd. So I think, they would be a very popular challenger for the Bucks. Otherwise, solid picks. Mike, your thoughts?
There were pretty much in every division, there was that one or two people, or in this case, like the Guns, a team where I thought, man, if I had some sort, if I could still utilize a Ring of Honor or some sort of minor system, I would just load them up there and basically let them, be a big deal. When you're stuck with 6 teams or 7 teams, you start having to make those decisions of who am I going to leave out. And unfortunately, in some cases, some of those younger wrestlers got cut from my list. The Claudio and Eddie Kingston thing's funny because recently I've been noticing on Twitch, there's a GCW Twitch channel that's showing old like Chikara and other indie stuff. And one of them actually was I don't even know what year it was from, but it was Eddie Kingston and Claudio, like Eddie Kingston talking about his feud with Claudio, how they like moved in together and they were buddies. And so it's kind of funny that this has been called back in this episode where, they have some sort of history, and turns out I actually got to see a little bit of it recently.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting. I think that's bonus points there for maybe those two coming together to do something great and knock off the unpopular heel champions. So interesting choices there. I kind of went a different direction on a couple picks, but with my tag team division, I made Adam Cole and Roderick Strong the tag team champions. I know Cole's been banged up, but again, for the purposes of this, we're assuming everybody is healthy. Obviously, Undisputed Era tie in there as well. I have FTR as my number one contender, if you will, as baby faces. Again, those guys are great. I have the Young Bucks right behind, kind of leaning into their heel character. I also put Eddie Kingston in the tag division. I put him in here with Jon Moxley because, again, those are two guys that kind of share that hardcore background. They're really popular with that fan base. I would think you could see them in some sort of gimmick match against the Bucks.
Exploding ring.
Yeah, exactly. Definitely, I think they bring a certain style to the tag team division. It's a little different. Speaking of which, I have Lance Archer in my tag division as well, but I put him in there with Big Bill. By all accounts, from everything I've heard, Big Bill's done a really nice job in AEW. You got two big guys just come in and just plow through people. Thought that'd be interesting. And then the last two picks are similar to you guys, Adam Copeland and Christian Cage, and Pentagon and Ray Phoenix to wrap up. Mike, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, that's a strong list. Any tie-in to Undisputed Era, I'm always a fan of. Moxley and Kingston is interesting, just as Kingston and Claudio were. Eddie Kingston's the kind of guy that, to me, he reminds me of, like, in the Attitude Era, someone like a Road Dogg. You wouldn't have had any interest in him as a singles wrestler, but if you put him in a tag team, for some reason, that's more palatable for me. So I could totally see that. Just glad to see Big Bill is doing something and seems to be healthy. But yeah, I mean, otherwise, just strong list from top to bottom.
Yeah, it's a really interesting tag divisions we'll have a chance to book. So we'll move out of the tag division. We'll move to the TNT title, which is the men's mid-card title. And Chris, we're going to let you go first this time. So Chris, who is your mid-card men's champion? And we'll let you go down the list as well.
All right. My mid-card men's AEW TNT title holder is Kazuchika Okada. Went with him after he just signed this huge contract. I feel like even though we're trying to make our dream or fix it pay-per-view here, it's hard to not have him become a champion relatively soon based off that amount of money that you're investing. And at the same time, I mean, he's a world-renowned wrestler, so it makes sense to throw him in, maybe not initially into the world title scene, but definitely into the TNT title scene. Following under him, I made the number one contender Hook. I feel like there's a lot there as far as Hook and who he is and his character, even with as new of a personality he is. He's got a lot of eyes on him in the internet wrestling community, not always good, but you can kind of turn that around to your benefit. You're working with your dad, Taz, here. I put him as a face fighting against Okada as a heel, assuming that he would still be teaming with the Young Bucks, because I feel like after his bout with Samoa Joe, where you have him kicking out of the Muscle Buster at one, no less, and kind of throwing him very early on into this world title scene, you need to go in and make that believable. Like, okay, he didn't win the title. You still put him in there. So how do we make this guy look strong? See if he can put on another bout is of similar quality with Okada. I think it's right up his alley. And then maybe have Taz, get in the way and try to interfere. And maybe Hook gets kind of annoyed at Taz and wants to kind of go on his own and make his own name for himself, doesn't want to cheat, stays face, and just wants to become a suplex machine, if you will. So after the number one contender rounding out my roster, I've got Adam Page, Darby Allin. I know he's out right now injured, but I like the idea of him returning now that Sting is gone, him getting back into kind of singles competition. Like, all right, do it without your mentor now kind of deal. Go back to not having Sting. Then I've got Swerve Strickland, Jay White, and Jay Lethal.
Yeah, solid division. Mike, your thoughts?
Yeah, just looking at it right off the bat, Lethal's a guy that I really wanted to find a spot for. There was a part of me that wanted to put him with Mark Briscoe, just because he's someone who deserves more of a run too, with the unfortunate situation with his brother. But yeah, Hook and Darby Allin are two guys that, again, as far as youth goes, I wanted to keep around. If I had a junior division, I think I would plug them there, because I think that would be a really good fit for them. But yeah, I feel like they've had these instances where they've really wanted to do something with Hook, and then they punt a little bit, and then they go in again. I don't dislike the idea of having Okada kind of beat him around for a while, to be honest.
Yeah, I think it's a really solid idea. Again, can't really argue with any of the picks here. I think they make a ton of sense, and Okada is the big bully at the top as a heel for a while would be a good way to kind of build that division up. So certainly interested to see how that ends up booked on your pay-per-view. We'll go to my TNT title picture next, and I have Samoa Joe as the babyface champion of the TNT title picture. I know he's the world champion right now in real life, but I like Joe as a guy that can kind of build that division and really make that title mean something. So I'm going to make him my babyface champion. My number one contender is Malachi Black, the guy that I think is criminally underused in AEW, especially in singles. And so I'm going to have a chance for him to go after a singles title. Adam Page, I know he's been maligned, probably online, maybe even by AEW fans. I still think the dude's really talented. I think getting him away from the elite and away from basically make him do his own thing as a babyface, I think will be a chance for him to kind of reset his character and get him back on that path where he's pushing back up toward the world title picture. He's just too talented for that not to happen. I also have Okada in the mid-card picture. I didn't have him as champion right away, but I do have him as a heel. I think that makes a lot of sense. Got Buddy Matthews in there. He's another dude that's just underused. I think makes a ton of sense for him to be chasing a singles title as well. Konosuke Takeshita, by all accounts, has done really, really well since he's come over, put on some great matches. I think his alignment with Don Callis makes a ton of sense there, and I think you can continue to build him up. And Kyle O'Reilly, I'm happy he's back. I like Kyle O'Reilly. I decided of the Undisputed Trio that's basically in AEW to keep him as the singles guy. And I think his singles matches are really interesting, and I think this will give him a chance to chase that mid-card title. But that's my mid-card division for the men. Your thoughts, Mike?
Yeah, I like this. I definitely intend in my list to elevate Malachi Black. He's, just like you said, someone who's been super underutilized. Buddy Matthews, he's always going to have a spot on my roster, whether it's as a tag team wrestler or singles. O'Reilly, out of your three current Undisputed Era guys, so to speak, in AEW, I think O'Reilly has the most interesting wrestling style. I think Like in my case, I put Cole in that position simply due to more of the popularity of him. I mean, he's certainly one of the most over dudes with that company still. But yeah, I mean, Samoa Joe as a champion in any division works. The guy just the guy exudes that air of being at the top of wherever he's at.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Chris, your thoughts on my men's mid-card title list?
Say my first thought is I'm glad that you guys were able to include Malachi Black and just kind of his stable around, because I was kind of sad to not be able to include anybody really in the main titles here. So glad they're getting love on your list, but at least it brings a little bit of spice to mine, I guess. Gives a little different view. Totally agree with Samoa Joe being at the top. I will say, like, there's a couple names that we have similar that are just swapped between the world title and TNT title scene. So great picks.
Yeah, it's certainly going to be interesting to see how I end up booking that out next week for the pay-per-view event. Mike, let's take a look at your AEW TNT title picture.
My TNT title holder presently would be Jay White. A lot of my logic around that is I feel like he's one of those early dudes that felt like a super hot free agent that AEW got. And I just think it's time they elevate those guys and make them do something really meaningful. I feel the same way about Okada and Mercedes Moné. Like, you're bringing in these people that supposedly WWE wanted to get instead, but you beat them out for them. Do something with them. Make them seem like that was a really big get. And I don't think they've really taken advantage of that to its fullest. For the number one contender, I have Swerve Strickland. He's another guy that I feel bad that WWE didn't keep around. I think he has all the potential in the world. Rounding out that division, I have Adam Cole, Malachi Black, Pac, who I think, whether he's a face or a heel, that bastard character of his works. It's really what he always lacked in WWE, that he had all the moves and he had the look. He just didn't have a remotely interesting character. Konosuke Takeshita. And finally, Juice Robinson, a guy who I think was really finding his way in New Japan when he made the jump to AEW. And I haven't really been all that interested in him since, but I think he's definitely talented.
Yeah, the people on your list, I think the two that I'm kind of bummed I didn't find a spot for were Pac and Juice Robinson. I think you're 100% right on Pac. He's found that character that makes him engaging to the audience, and he's not just a guy who's a great wrestler. And so often Vince McMahon fell back on some of these guys that their character was that they're great wrestlers. And that doesn't really work in WWE, and it really doesn't work in AEW either. You got to have something a little more than that. And I think with Pac, he's found that. I think that's a great call. And Juice Robinson, he's come such a long way. He even came a long way in New Japan before he left there, really kind of taking his character to the next level. And I think he's definitely a dude that should be considered for a mid-card title. Chris, your thoughts on Mike's mid-card list?
Juice Robinson is another one of those that I was sad that I just didn't have space for on my list. I can still remember seeing him for the first time when you guys started getting me into the G1 climaxes and getting to see his character, as you said. So definitely sad I didn't get to include him. Glad he's getting some love on your list. Once again, you've got some similar to mine. I will be interested to see kind of how you use Swerve Strickland being number one contender for your title as a face. I had him on mine, but I didn't mention that I had him as a heel. So be interesting to see what they're doing on our separate pay-per-views.
Yeah, I think heel and face alignment is certainly going to be interesting because they do vary between these two lists. But
it's difficult because you find you want to make so many of these wrestlers heels. And you think, okay, who has that potential to either be a tweener or a face? And Strickland's a cool dude. He could probably work face or heel and it'd be okay. So, we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I think his Hit Row character in NXT was a baby face, really. Like, so I think 100% could see him as a cool baby face, but certainly a very interesting list. We're going to move on to the AEW TBS title, the women's mid-card title, and then we'll take a break. We'll start with my list on the women's mid-card title. I actually thought this was hard because there are a few of these women that I don't get a chance to see or have not gotten a chance to see either because they've come from Japan or I just haven't watched AEW in far too long. So my mid-card champion is going to be Athena. She was great in WWE. I think she's really had a nice run in AEW, especially in Ring of Honor. I think making her the mid-card champion on the AEW program makes a ton of sense. She's a good baby face. I think she'll be a nice anchor for that championship and can put on some great matches. My number one contender is Taya Valkyrie, and I just can't understand why she hasn't been a bigger deal. Either, she had, of course, was in WWE for a very short time. Didn't really do much there. Went to AEW. Don't feel like she's really done as much there as I thought she would. I just think of her in Impact, TNA, and in AAA, and she's always been so good, either as a face or a heel. I'm using her as a heel here as the number one contender, but I just don't understand why she hasn't been a bigger star. She's really good. The rest of my mid-card division, I have Chris Statlander. I think she's really good. I think she's a good baby face. Mariah May is new to the picture, but she's kind of attached to Toni Storm, so using her as a heel. But I kind of want to see more of her. Willow Nightingale, by all accounts, is doing really well. Certainly want to continue to see her as a baby face. Another person who I just don't understand why she hasn't really been a bigger deal, and that's Mercedes Martinez. She's really solid in the ring. She's got a great heel character. Would love to see her kind of work her way up. And Julia Hart certainly has kind of taken a step forward after she got her heel character and kind of went the dark route with her run. So I definitely see she could be in either division, honestly, and I put her for now in the mid-card division. But Mike, your thoughts on the women's mid-card?
Yeah, not a whole lot to argue with there, to be honest. I too wonder why Taya Valkyrie's never really achieved that level of success anywhere else that she did in AAA. And of course, certainly in Impact, where she was just kind of like a final boss character, basically. She was a beast. And another one of those head scratchers when you look at it from top to bottom, the women who are with AEW, why we're not seeing her more often. Mercedes Martinez is another one who just physically imposing, good wrestler. There's a place for her. Like if you can have your main event of Dynamite be Willow Nightingale versus Riho, there's a spot on your TV program for Mercedes Martinez.
Yeah, 100%. That's my thinking of that. For sure. Chris, your thoughts?
I do appreciate that we all kind of went a similar route, not to spoil anybody's picks, but as far as having a heel champ and a face champ, and then have the heel champs roster be filled with faces and the face champs roster be filled with heels. It seems like inadvertently we've all kind of come to the same decision on that, but I also have Athena high on my list. I don't have her as the champion, but I may or may not have her as the number one contender.
Well, since you're going to tease your list, why don't you go ahead and give us your list for the AEW TBS title?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, Athena is the number one contender for the TBS title, and for the champion, I selected Britt Baker. Learned a lot of these names today, but Britt Baker is one that I already knew, and she's one that you could easily put into the women's world title scene or roster, but I kind of wanted to show her some love and rather just have her existing as a member of the world title roster. I figured why not actually give her a championship and make her the TBS title holder. I think her and Athena could put on a great match. Rounding out the rest of the roster is that I have some similar picks as you, Chris Statlander, Mariah May. Then I also have Nyla Rose, Sky Blue, and Queen Aminata.
It's a solid division for sure. I think Britt Baker, obviously we're going to talk more about her when we get to the world title picture, but she's great. I think she's a star for them, and having her as a champion makes a ton of sense. We already mentioned Athena. Nyla Rose certainly is as your kind of destroyer type wrestler. I think that makes a ton of sense. Chris Statlander, again, really good. Mariah May, really good. Sky Blue has kind of taken that next step lately as well. I don't really know much about Queen Aminata, but I hear people talking about her, so that's got to be a good thing. So, again, very solid mid-card. Mike, your thoughts?
Yeah, it's an interesting choice putting Britt Baker as a champion of the mid card as opposed to maybe having her kind of hover somewhere maybe in the bottom tier of the top tier. That's definitely not a bad idea. Sky Blue is another woman who I wanted to put on my list and just didn't find a spot for. Even with the expanded roster, she probably would be the first one out.
Sometimes that happens. It's just like the NCAA tournament. You know, sometimes you're on the bubble and sometimes you're on the wrong side of the bubble, and there were quite a few good names that ended up on the wrong side of the bubble in all these divisions. But before we go to break, Mike, it's time to look at your AEW TBS title lineup.
Let's do it. For my champion, I'm keeping Julia Hart at the top of the division. Big House of Black fan. I think her finding that character and getting that heel persona definitely made her what she is today. The former cheerleader gimmick just wasn't. It didn't feel like prime time, I suppose. For my number one contender, Mercedes Martinez. What else could you want out of a mid-card top contender than Mercedes, like I mentioned before? Ruby Soho, who I think never really was utilized all that well in WWE. And honestly, up to this point in AEW, I think she's got a great character and someone who can wrestle. So let's do something with her, please. Rounding out the list, I have Chris Statlander, Deonna Purrazzo, Anna Jay, and Mariah May.
A really solid list. Ruby Soho is definitely one that you talk about being on the wrong side of the bubble. I kind of she was just kind of on the outside, but I would 100%, argue that she deserves a spot on one of these lists. She's really good. And again, someone who was underutilized in WWE and I don't know, has been fully utilized in AEW either. So I would like to see her have a nice run. Otherwise, really good picks there. And we'll talk more about Purrazzo when we get to the world title picture. But Chris, your thoughts on Mike's mid-card women's list?
Yeah, I'm glad that Julia Hart, in me moving Britt Baker over, as we'll get to, I kind of decided to elevate her, but she's definitely championship level. I can see why you would put her as retaining the TBS titles, but definitely could also see her in the world title picture as well. Glad we all picked Chris Statlander. From what I've seen, she's really impressed me. And I will say that I have a couple of picks of yours that are over here in the mid card. I just may have shifted them over a little bit.
Yeah, I think we're going to see some of these names again when we get to the world title picture, because we do have some that are shifted over on one list to the other. But those are our first three divisions. We're going to step aside for a timeout. We come back, we're going to talk the women's world title and then the men's world title. And we'll kind of set the stage for what will be the AEW Super Slam or whatever we're going to call the pay-per-view event coming up next week. But we got two more divisions to reveal. We'll do that on the other side of this time out here on the Nerdcast Empire. Back on the Nerdcast Empire, we are in the process of, quote unquote, fixing AEW over the next 2 weeks. We are drafting new divisions, and then we will be building fictional pay-per-views next week to do our best to put on a great AEW show for our listeners. Don't forget to check out our website, nerdcastempire.com. We've got a store there, nerdcastempire.com/store. We appreciate everybody who's picked up their merch. If you haven't, check it out. You can pick up some merch and support the Nerdcast Empire. Don't forget, coming up on Monday, that is tomorrow, we have another edition of Music Mondays, and it is a stacked list this week. We are going to be looking at the releases from March the 8th. It's going to be tough sledding to find just two for each of us, because honestly, it's one of the better lists we've had in a couple of weeks. So make sure you check that out. Music Monday coming up tomorrow. And then next week, we're going to be looking at the pay-per-views for AEW that we have created. And then, of course, Music Monday to follow. And then the following week, we're going to be getting to WrestleMania. And we're going to be having podcasts on both, basically recording them Saturday night and Sunday night. So we will have wrestling podcast coming out late in the night, Saturday night into Sunday, and then late Sunday night as well. And then Music Monday on Monday. So you're going to get a ton of Nerdcast Empire coming up in a couple of weeks. So make sure you check that out at nerdcastempire.com. It's time to get to our world title pictures. And we're going to start off with Chris with the AEW women's world title. And it'll certainly be interesting to see. We just talked about the women's mid-card title. Now we're going to get to the world title. So, Chris, who do you have in your women's world title division?
Toni Storm is my AEW women's world title holder, kept her there, and I couldn't imagine anybody else. She may be one of the best heels just in the business, or at least in AEW across men and women right now. And she puts on a hell of a show. As far as the number one contender, this is similar to my Okada situation. Mercedes Moné, just giving her a contract, you're kind of throwing the women's division essentially as far as the hype goes on her back. And it's hard not to include her relatively quickly in the women's world title picture with as much hype as she has behind her. So have her and Toni Storm going at it. After that, I've got Thunder Rosa and Hikaru Shida, both names that have been in and around the world title picture multiple times, especially with Toni Storm going up against Toni Storm in the past, with Shida kind of ending some of Toni Storm's longer reigns or record-breaking reigns. After them, I've got Julia Hart, as I mentioned, kind of in moving Britt Baker over as the TBS face title holder. I had to bring someone over, so I figured why not steal a heel throw over here. So brought over Julia Hart, and she is my one House of Black representative, I guess. So I do at least get to show a little love there. And then the last two on my list for the women's world title picture are Jamie Hayter and Deonna Purrazzo.
It's a really good list, and I think we'll point out something about this list when we get through all three of our world title lists. But obviously, Toni Storm's doing the best work of her career. She is another one that, like Pac, didn't really have a compelling character in WWE, but now has found this outrageous, over the top, really WWE-ish character that has absolutely worked. She's always had the in-ring ability. she's found this character that has kind of taken her to the next level. And I'm really happy for her that she's really found that success. Mercedes Moné is a star. I think that makes a ton of sense to have her there. Thunder Rosa's really good. Glad to see her high on your list. Hikaru Shida, she to me has been underutilized lately in AEW. I think I'd like to see her in a more prominent role. Julia Hart's really good. Jamie Hayter's really good. And Deonna Purrazzo is another one who's one of the more underrated wrestlers in the world. Want to see her really have a good run in the AEW women's division. Mike, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think starting out Toni Storm, the character they developed for her, or she developed herself, is really what put her over the edge. She's always had the talent, but for a long time, it seemed like her only character was that she kind of looked like she was in a 80s hairband or something. But this timeless character has just been a home run all around. And it's kind of funny when this happens in a place like AEW, where you think all you care about is work rate, but it's this character driven thing that becomes a big deal. Moné, honestly, if you're going to pay someone as much as undoubtedly Tony Khan is paying her, you have to elevate her immediately. Otherwise, you look like you wasted your money. And since you have total control over what you do with her, there's no other choice. Thunder Rosa's always been solid. To me, Shida's someone who always kind of felt like the standard bearer for a while, especially in times when their women's division felt even leaner than it is now. She was always kind of someone that you knew would be solid and would put on a good match and kind of represented the division. The rest of the list, all people I like as well. Hayter's someone who seemed to organically get over with the crowd while being a heel. Would like to see them do more with her now, too.
Yeah, very, very solid list for sure. So, Mike, we'll let you go next with your AEW Women's World Title division.
Now that I've pretty much already given some explanation to the people who are also on my list, let's just run through them really quickly. My women's champion would be Toni Storm. Number one contender would be Mercedes Moné. Dr. Britt Baker would be right up there as well. Jamie Hayter, Hikaru Shida, Taya Valkyrie, and Thunder Rosa.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about pretty much most of these people already and can't argue with really any of these. Britt Baker's awesome, like we mentioned. I think she's someone who could be heel or face, using her as a heel here, which makes a ton of sense. I think if you have Moné beat Storm for the title, Baker is the first challenger, could make a ton of sense there.
She's a dentist. She has to be a heel.
100%. Jamie Hayter's great. Hikaru Shida, as we mentioned. Taya Valkyrie, I told you, she's awesome. I certainly could have put her in my world title picture as well. And Thunder Rosa, as I mentioned earlier, just really good and also very underrated. Chris, your thoughts on Mike's women's world title division?
Yeah, like you mentioned, we've already talked about a lot of these folks already, but I think where it's really going to get interesting is those heel face dynamics. Me having Britt Baker as a face champion, you having her more as a heel contender. Jamie Hayter, you have her as a face. I've got her as a heel. So we'll see how it shapes up here.
Yeah, definitely. It's going to be very interesting to see how those matchups work out. But moving on to my women's world title division, and it was unanimous across all three of us. All three of us not only picked the same champion, but kept the same champion that AEW currently has. And that's Toni Storm as the world champion on the women's side, with Mercedes Moné as the number one contender. Again, it just makes far too much sense for her to be there. I have Deonna Purrazzo right behind. And to me, she would probably be my first challenger for Moné if Moné wins the title from Storm. I think Purrazzo is really good and she's a great wrestler. So, they're going to have good in-ring work. Hikaru Shida's right there, right behind. I have Britt Baker as a face also, but she certainly could be a heel. Just kind of lined her as a face being in the division with Storm. Jamie Hayter, she's been really good. And Thunder Rosa, again, as I mentioned, very underrated, but really solid as well. Mike, not a whole lot to add because it's a lot of the same people, but your thoughts?
Yeah, great list. My thought behind Baker as a heel is more based on, I have Moné as a face who will likely be the new champion when we're done with whatever our event is. To me, Britt Baker is a heel, kind of coming in and saying, how dare they do all this for you? What about me? I've been here since day one. I just think that to me makes more sense for her as a character if you align her as Moné's first opponent.
So I will hint at the fact that there could be some alignment changes in my pay-per-view that might impact that. So
these are very preliminary because you're kind of just looking, okay, who is that person? Yeah, I think they're a heel. I think they're a face.
Yeah.
Things are always subject to change.
And I already have some ideas on the women's side about making a big alignment change in the women's world title
You're
match.
going to make Moné a heel after it's over. I can just tell. I mean, come on.
Yeah, I think we're gonna potentially have a double turn in the women's world title match.
Okay,
we'll talk about that next week. But I've got, because Toni Storm is incredibly popular with that crowd, and I don't know if Mercedes Moné is yet, and I think that's a golden opportunity to take advantage of that, to have Moné build a faction, a heel faction, and basically have Storm end up being the chaser as a babyface.
Even if Moné is popular initially, I think she has the capability of getting them to turn on her just based on where she's been and her backstory and just kind of her character.
We'll see if that's how it turns out, but I've certainly had some ideas about going that route, which certainly could be interesting. But Chris, your thoughts on my world title division?
Yeah, I know AEW gets some flack for their women's division, but to their credit, as we've listed, they have a ton of amazing talent. And I think it speaks volumes that we all not only pick the same champion, but retain the champion that AEW already has. So they do recognize Toni Storm's talent and how over she is as a heel. And I think it's just about getting some of these other members more utilized. As we've mentioned, a lot of them go underutilized. And I think that's the main caveat here. So hopefully we can all do it justice with our rosters and get some of these folks utilized.
And again, I don't know if you have the number off the top of your head, but it was something like there was 124 men signed to the roster.
On the Wikipedia page. Yeah, the men's roster listed like 128 people.
So part of the reason they're underutilized, there's just too many people. And WWE has the same problem. They, even with the improved booking and more people feeling important in WWE, they still have too many people. So again, what we're doing in this exercise is going to be easy, and it's a great opportunity to utilize underutilized talent because we're only picking a handful of all of those people to represent our AEW.
I think that was my takeaway, was not so much like, hey, they don't have enough talent. It was more like, why don't I see these people all the time? Why am I not hearing about all these? Why is X on television every week and not Y? I think it's more of a who you're deciding to push and with what consistency or regularity, I think might be more the issue than not having the people.
And I think that's the fair statement about this exercise is these people that we're choosing on this list are people that we would want to see on TV, if not every week. Certainly almost every week. I think that's really kind of the statement we're making with these choices. It's time to look at the AEW world title picture on the men's side. We're going to let Mike go first on this one. A lot of great talent still out there. Mike, who is in your men's world title division?
So yeah, for the time being, I've kept Samoa Joe as my world champion. Like I said before, the guy just exudes championship air about him. Like he just seems like a guy who runs things. As my number one contender, like I mentioned before, if you're going to bring in these people who I'm supposed to believe are really hot free agents, you got to elevate them. So Kazuchika Okada is going to be my number one contender. Right behind him would be Will Ospreay. After that, you got Bryan Danielson, who is, I think he's kind of winding down his career, but he's still capable of having a good match with anybody. Then the remaining would be Kenny Omega, MJF, and Claudio.
Chris, I'll let you get your thoughts in first on Mike's men's world title picture.
Yeah, I totally agree with Samoa Joe being at the top of the list here. Like you said, he's just got that demeanor, and it doesn't matter if he's a heel or a face. He's just got that, I'm going to beat you. I don't care who you are. I don't care if you're a good guy. I don't care if you're a bad guy. I'm the champion, and I'm staying that way. And I think I agree with Okada. I think if you don't have him as the champion, world title, TNT title, whatever it may be, you almost have to have him in contention for one of the titles, being as a number one contender, especially with the contract he just signed. Will Ospreay, there's no way you can leave him off this list. Bryan Danielson was kind of a close cut for me. Like you said, he is nearing kind of the latter half of his career here, but I can definitely see why you included him. Kenny Omega, feel the same way about him as Will Ospreay. I don't know how you can leave him off. MJF, one of the best heel runs since AEW's been around. So totally agree with you having him here as a heel. I might have a little something else to say about that. And then Claudio puts on amazing matches. Obviously, I couldn't include him in my world title picture just because I had him over in the tag match, but he's definitely a singles competitor as well.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to see these guys show up again and again over the next two lists, but I have no issue with Joe being the world champion as he is now. I think it's great for him that he's getting that recognition. Okada right there as the number one contender makes a ton of sense. Clearly getting him away from the Bucks in this scenario as a baby face which again is completely fine. I mean, Okada was a heel in the early days of Chaos. Then obviously as Chaos turned face, Okada became a face. Now as a heel in AEW again, but certainly can do either. I think that would be, the fans will be happy to cheer him. So that'll be really easy. Ospreay, he's so good. He can pretty much do it all. Danielson, as we'll point out here when we get to my list, certainly is still one of, if not the best in the world, just with the art of wrestling. Kenny Omega, I just hope he comes back healthy. I think he's going to show up for all of us, but he's just an amazing wrestler. I know Jim Cornette does not like Kenny Omega, but to me, Kenny Omega and his feud with Okada, still probably one of the best feuds I've ever seen as a wrestling fan. So I really hope he's able to come back and compete at a high level. MJF is great. He's going to come back at some point. He'll probably end up coming back as a face because the fans are going to be happy to see him. But I still think his best work is as a heel. So I would agree with that alignment. And Claudio Castagnoli, he's a guy who went to AEW with all the criticism that WWE just refused to push him to the main title. And then he's basically not been pushed to the main title in AEW either, which is a crime, to be honest with you. The dude is really good. I don't know why he's not a world champion. He makes a ton of sense on this list. Let's go to Chris and get his list on the men's world title picture.
Yeah, Mike, I may have picked the same as you or copied you because I also have Samoa Joe as my AEW world title champion as a heel. Like we said, it doesn't matter. We've talked about Samoa Joe so much already, but Samoa Joe, I feel like, is an example to AEW's case where one of their big goals when they set out here is to take some of these people who have been underutilized in other companies and kind of let them be all they can be. And Samoa Joe is one of their biggest examples. I mean, I wish so much that he could have been so much more in WWE when he was over there, but AEW has successfully pushed Samoa Joe to the top in a believable way. And I think it's a testament that we've all three at this point picked him. Besides Tony Storm, he's the only one that we picked that we kept as a champion. So, and as far as I'm concerned, I have a little extra love for him just because the Muscle Buster might be my favorite finisher in all of wrestling. And I love the homage to Kaneko Man. So sticking with Samoa Joe as the champion, I did get a little bit different with my number one contender, and I went Kenny Omega. I'm building this a lot. I mean, if Kenny Omega returns, when Kenny Omega returns, I feel like he's worldwide loved. I mean, and having him as a face going up against Samoa Joe, I think they would put on a hell of a match. And then on the off chance that he were to top Samoa Joe, which I think is believable given his reputation in the past, then I have the opportunity to potentially have Omega and Okada as my top champions. Could be a little infighting there. As you said, they had one of the greatest feuds in wrestling history. So maybe you have a inter-title fight. Maybe Kenny Omega tries to get that belt collector persona back a little bit there. Maybe it goes to his head. I'm thinking way past one pay-per-view, but we'll see how it goes. Filling out my main roster, we've got Will Ospreay. As I said, hard to imagine him not being on this list. MJF, I have him as a face. Like you mentioned, people are going to want to see him. I'm trying to get away from, or try to avoid as much as possible, bringing in someone who is inevitably going to be cheered no matter what, and then forcing them to be a heel, even though he could easily kill it as a heel. We've seen it before. Then I've got Konosuke Takeshita. He's one, he's probably the one on my list that's been the most underutilized. And I know he's been listed in your guys' list for the mid-card title, but I would love to see him in the main card here and really have a shot at that world title. And then rounding out, I've got Bryan Danielson. He almost didn't make the list. We did add in a sixth person. And I mean, it's hard to argue with the amount of matches that he's had that have been amazing. And then I've got Pac, another underutilized talent who's kind of been around and could have been so much more. Like you said, he's got the move set. Doesn't matter. He's got that Samoa Joe persona. Doesn't matter if he's face or heel. And I feel like he would fit right in here as just kind of a wild card. What's he going to do?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a solid list. You've got Takeshita and Omega as baby faces. In the AEW world, that feud could really make a ton of sense because you've got Takeshita working with Don Callis.
Yeah.
And there's definitely that tie-in there with Takeshita and Omega. Again, I have nothing but love for Pac. Otherwise, yeah, I mean, MJF is a face. I can certainly see the logic because the fans are going to cheer him. But otherwise, I got no issues with any of that. Mike?
Yeah, the list is totally fine. As far as kind of comparing it to mine, I might also be setting up a possible Okada versus Omega feud after whatever this fictitious event we're going to create is. So I can definitely see that. The thing about MJF that's interesting is, like, if he hadn't been such a great heel, people wouldn't cheer him. So I think when you say he's a face, you're kind of taking away the part of his character that made him enjoyable. In true to life in AEW, I feel like his run as a face wasn't that great. Mm-hmm. So I don't know how you reignite him as a heel, but I think that's what I would want to do.
It'll be interesting to see if they give it a shot, because I do think that's where the most money is for MJF, is as a heel that can just be evil to everybody and get back to the top of the card. But so that leaves us, I think, with my world title picture on the men's side. I went with Bryan Danielson as the heel champion. I think Bryan Danielson as a heel is probably some of the best work he's ever done. They dating back to his Planet's Champion gimmick in WWE that I thought was just really good. I think he, of course, can put on a great match with anybody, and I'm setting up a great match because I think he and Kenny Omega as the number one contender are going to close my pay-per-view, and that could be an all-timer, I think, in my opinion, and that's what AEW is all about. We do matches, and this is going to be a really good match to close my fictional pay-per-view event. I got MJF right there behind as a heel. I think if Omega were to beat Danielson, you've got MJF lined up to come in behind and ruin the moment. Will Ospreay as a babyface. Ospreay can do whatever. He's just so good. I got Jay White, and after that, I think Jay White is a world championship guy. I know he necessarily hasn't been presented that way on AEW television, but I still remember the Jay White that was IWGP champion. To me, he's probably more than anybody else in AEW the victim of the worst possible timing, because everything pointed towards him going to WWE, and then Vince came back in and he just didn't want to jump in with that uncertainty and ended up in AEW. I think he's as underutilized as any. I know they've been using him a little more lately. I hope that's a trend because he's just really good as a heel. Claudio Castagnoli is another dude, as you mentioned earlier, that was underutilized in WWE. I'm putting him in my world title picture. And Swerve Strickland. I think that's where this dude's going to end up. I think he's going to be a world champion someday. I think as a babyface, he could certainly do it as a heel as well, but he's too good in the ring. He's too good of a character. I think it would make a ton of sense for him to work his way up. That is my world title picture. Mike, your thoughts?
One thing that's definitely true from all of our lists is there's definitely that group of maybe 20 or so wrestlers that you could probably put in either division, but you still want to see one place or another. Danielson as a heel, yeah, that is definitely what he's best for. The Planet's Champion thing was hilarious. And, he kind of has that air of I'm a better wrestler than everybody. And there's nothing more heelish than you believing you're the greatest wrestler and no one can possibly beat you. Omega, enough said there. I think the other important thing about making MJF a heel is I think it'll allow you to totally separate him from that really terrible Devil storyline. I think that's important. Ospreay and White definitely belong there. And Claudio and Swerve, can't argue with that either. I think Claudio is funny because even though stature-wise they're not really the same, I kind of feel like in a lot of ways in WWE, Gunther's getting the run that Claudio deserved. He's a dude that just is a foreign guy who is really good at wrestling. That could have been Claudio just as easily.
Yeah, honestly, I hadn't really given it any consideration, but 100% could have absolutely been him. And
taking nothing away from Gunther, he's amazing, but so is Claudio.
Yeah, in my mind, I would love to see the two of them fight in a WWE ring someday. Yeah. But it's just really talented. And again, just kind of, in my storyline of AEW, the Devil storyline does not exist. We just purged that. That did not happen. So we're just not even gonna go there. So MJF is coming in as a heel in my storyline. But Chris, you get the final word on my men's world title division.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've got my work cut out for me being the only one to pick MJF as a face. But I'm totally happy with throwing away the Devil storyline too. I think as far as actual AEW is going to be concerned, it's going to be hard to have him come back after being turned on and not have him want to seek some sort of revenge. But luckily we have the benefit of ignoring all that and pretending it didn't happen. I am interested to see as far as our lists go. I know Mike and I both had Will Ospreay as a heel, and he is one of those that I think can kind of operate as both, just being who he is and his big name, and being that guy that's better than everybody else in his own mind and many others' minds as well. So I'll be interested to see if there's any just small changes as far as your list goes, having him as a face versus our heel picks.
I will say the one thing the reason I picked Will Ospreay was as a baby face is he is the prototypical AEW wrestler. He's a guy that can basically, in fact, I think I just saw a story. It might've been Bryan Danielson had a quote talking about how nobody can put on a match like Will Ospreay. And he's basically what Danielson considers the ideal modern professional wrestler. That is right up the alley of the crowd in AEW. That's the guy they want to see on their TV every week. And to me, if that's the case, that kind of makes you a baby face. And honestly, I think he is, I think I've talked about on the podcast. If not, we've certainly talked about it off air. He was kind of a heel online, like Seth Rollins for a lot of years. One of those dudes that just didn't have an internal filter and would reply to things. And then later on would be like, yeah, I probably shouldn't have done that. He's done a lot of work, as has Rollins, to kind of get away from that and kind of know when to put the phone down, and has kind of transformed himself into this baby face. He's the family guy. He signed this contract so he could fly home every week. Like, he chose AEW when, WWE would have made him a main event level guy. So that's why I chose him as a baby face. Could he be a heel? Absolutely. His United Empire stuff was great. The Hidden Blade kind of coming out of that era. But to me, I made him a face just because it could be the face of AEW, very literally.
I just think the default setting for British wrestlers is heel until they do something to say otherwise.
Oh, that's certainly an option there for sure. But
I think William Regal kind of just set that precedent.
Yeah, it's something about the voice and how they speak. It lends itself to blue blood character types. That's just how I hear it.
It's funny because to me, I see a difference between like the William Regal blue blood and the Will Ospreay. I probably hang out in a pub on Saturday mornings and watch football. Like, yeah, to me, it's like he almost comes across in his accent as like an everyman. Whereas
he does seem a lot less refined.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just, I mean, that would be, again, just kind of.
That doesn't make him a face. That just makes him different.
That is going to wrap things up for this week's episode. We are going to throw a wrench into all these plans by spinning the TK punishment wheel sometime in the next couple of days to find out what malign stipulation is going to be added to each of our pay-per-view events. And then next week, we're going to come back. We're going to put on our pay-per-view. And again, we will have a blank slate. You can put on a short pay-per-view. You can use everybody on your roster. The only requirement will be that you have to defend your titles and you have to use whatever Tony Khan punishment wheel punishment you get when you spin that. But otherwise, it could be very interesting to see how these shows are booked. That's going to wrap things up for this week. Big thanks to the guys once again for joining me on the podcast. Big thanks to Stoveleg Media for their continued support of our podcast. A big thanks to everybody that's been listening. Our listenership numbers continue to go up. We really appreciate that. We're all over the world now. So make sure you check us out wherever you get your podcast each and every week. And don't forget, tomorrow, it's Music Monday on the Nerdcast Empire. We've got some great choices for you coming up tomorrow. So make sure you check that out. That's going to wrap things up. For the rest of our crew, I'm Matt saying so long. Don't forget to join the Empire, the Nerdcast Empire.